Your Excellency, Madam Robina Nabaja, our Prime Minister of Uganda, the Chair of the Forum from the Government of Niger, our Deputy Chairperson, my sister, the African Union Commission. I'd like to recognize Mama Joyce Banda, our former President of Malawi. Excellencies, our UN colleagues here, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking the government and the people of Ethiopia for hosting this year's African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, and the warm welcome, and I welcome also our Minister for National Planning and Development. I would like to thank the Chair of the Forum, the Government of Niger, for the leadership that they have shown over the past year in helping us to navigate the headwinds of development and economic prosperity for the continent. I'd like to express my deep appreciation to the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and today is ably represented by the Deputy Chairperson, and her leadership across the continent, but beyond, because you have certainly showed us what it is that we need to do in the international community to partner with the African Union. Your call for strong institutions this morning to deliver for the people is critical, but also the genuine partnerships that are needed for multilateralism to thrive. So thank you. I also welcome my colleague, Mr. Claver Gatete, for the first time in his role as Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, and thank him and his team for the excellent preparation of the forum. Excellencies, the world is facing multiple complex interconnected challenges, and our great continent is being hit hard by a devastating series of global shocks and their impact on our people, on our environment, and on the economies. COVID-19, the cost of living crisis, and the triple planetary crisis of climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution have caused a perfect storm and immense suffering, and further exacerbating Africa's vulnerabilities and reversing the gains of the last decade. Conflicts and instability near and far are thriving, causing untold suffering and further jeopardizing the African Union's goal of silencing the guns at achieving sustainable development. Debt servicing is at an all-time high due to external shocks and is squeezing the economies on this continent dry, leaving very little fiscal space or nothing to invest in sustainable development, often at the expense of education and health services. Developing economies are exacerbated by what we would say is a new bad norm of low investment, low growth, and stalled progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. As we pass the halfway point of the SDGs and complete the first decade of implementing the African Union's 2063 agenda, our sustainable development efforts are at risk of failure. We can demonstrate some significant strides towards sustainable development gains, but they remain fragile. This includes the African Continental Free Trade Area and the Single Africa Air Transport Market, both key tenets of Agenda 2063. And these point to our booming potentials for the technology and innovation sector. Excellencies, colleagues, we know that this progress is not enough, but we also know that more and better progress is possible. At the SDG Summit last September, governments endorsed a bold political declaration recognizing means of implementation, finance, trade, capacities, technology, as the key barrier to achieving progress. In the face of multiple crises, development countries are not accessing the finance they need at the scale and in the time with a sense of urgency. The gap is enormous. An additional $4 trillion must be invested every year to 2030 to have a chance of achieving the SDGs globally. In other words, we desperately need to increase the flow of capital. Yet today, capital into the developing world has gone into reverse. Bondholders and commercial banks have taken over $300 billion out of developing countries over the last 2 years. International financial institutions are trying to buttress countries, but have been unable to stem the tide. Net transfers from IFIs to developing countries fell by more than half last year. Excluding concessional flows, they fell to zero. This reversal of capital is partly a story of debt. Since 2010, Africa's debt increased by 183%, roughly 4 times higher than the region's growth rate in dollar terms. These debts are now maturing, obliging countries to confront heavy debt service to satisfy their creditors. Rising interest rates have now pushed debt service far higher through no fault of those who took the debt in the first place. Total debt service accounted for a staggering 47.5% of government revenue in sub-Saharan Africa last year. This has crowded out expenditure on essential services as well as investments in the continent's future. 20 out of 54 countries are at high risk or already in debt distress. With high debt service comes limited fiscal space. This is further exacerbated by years of emergency spending to respond to global shocks and little growth in revenue, reflecting slow economic growth and modest progress in growing the tax base. It is why the Secretary General has called for an SDG stimulus of at least $500 billion a year to scale up affordable long-term financing for developing countries, alongside a series of structural reforms to the very institutions and rules that make up the international financial architecture. Africa's leadership and collective voice will be essential to making the SDG stimulus a reality and taking decisive steps towards a global financial architecture that is more equitable, resilient, responsive, and accessible to everyone. Excellencies, colleagues, the political declaration is only a first step. It must be followed by concrete, ambitious, and transformative action that will put us on the path to deliver the SDGs by 2030, but also the ambitions of the continent by 2063. In this regard, it is essential that we scale up action on key transitions and investment pathways that can accelerate progress across the goals. Both regionally and nationally, we are seeing opportunities for critical transitions that can move progress. It has always been said that we don't bring enough clarity to the agenda, that we take everything and that the agenda is too ambitious. But it cannot be ambitious for a continent that has this much potential in terms of its human resource, over 70% of our youth. Allow me to highlight 4 areas in particular. First, inclusive and sustainable energy, which powers sustainable development. And let me say here, with a just transition. For a just transition requires resources. We cannot be expected to see African economies transition to a green, sustainable energy without the investments that are required. African countries are making tangible progress in securing access to sustainable energy. Access to electricity rose by nearly 10% in the last 6 years. But Africa is also home to 60% of the world's most coveted solar resources. But the continent only attracted 2% of global investments in renewable energy over the last 2 decades. This underinvestment means a continent with the potential to be a renewable energy superpower, lagging with just 1% of installed solar capacity. We are also home to a significant proportion of the minerals critical to the global renewals revolution, an immense potential source of wealth. It is worth remembering that the electric vehicles value chain is estimated to be worth nearly $60 trillion by 2050, a huge potential market for African renewables. As Africa seeks maximum benefits from this market, resource extraction must not undermine the livelihoods of the vulnerable. The Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals is critical to ensure that we do not repeat the past patterns of exploitation. Finance is also vital to rolling out renewables more widely, but we need to take a systematic approach at home. Governments must set ambitious renewable energy targets to contribute to the goal of tripling renewables capacity by 2030 and shift subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables to better participate in global supply chains for critical minerals like copper, cobalt, and other materials. Rwanda's Renewable Energy Fund to tackle electricity accessibility challenges in the remote and mountainous rural areas is a good example, as are Ethiopia's policies and strategies to promote green energy use. By putting forward NDCs that usher in the energy transition, countries do have an opportunity to comprehensively address these challenges. But yet again, let me underscore, without the resources that are needed in time and at scale, these ambitions will not happen. Second, sustainable food systems. After a long period of improvement, hunger has worsened substantially in Africa. Around 280 million people undernourished, and an increase of 57 million people since COVID-19 pandemic. Small farmers dependent on agriculture are impacted every year by climate-related weather events, with losses estimated at $670 million per year. The challenges faced by our food systems are not easily overcome, but significant progress has been made in advancing food system transformation across Africa by African states. Various African initiatives are embedding food systems transformation across sustainable development strategies and plans. Positive examples are the African Union Commission's Regional Nutrition Strategy and the African Common Position on Food Sovereignty and Resilience. 42 African countries have developed national pathways to implement the UN vision under the Food Systems Summit, and a recent call to action resulting from the Food Systems Stocktake number 2. These are fully in line with national and regional investment plans under the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Programme for agriculture production and food security and nutrition. We are not without plans and strategies. What we are without is the funds behind them, the resources behind them to actually implement them. The third, digital connectivity. Countries in this region are emerging as trailblazers for innovation and booming tech industries. Yet the divide between and within African countries remains significant. While internet access and mobile penetration gaps are persisting between poor and those that are more well off, rural and urban areas, male and female users, more must be done to scale up investments in technology and digital infrastructure to bridge this divide. National digital strategies in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Rwanda are great examples of how we can shape investment pathways at scale across the region. The fourth issue is in education. No country can harness the opportunities provided by food, energy, and digital transitions unless they invest in more quality, relevant, and future-oriented education systems. The AU's decision to make 2024 the African Year of Education and its comprehensive 10-year continental education strategy for Africa speaks to the strong recognition of this fact by African leaders. So too does the progress being made in the area of education by several countries, from Sierra Leone to Kenya to Cote d'Ivoire to Namibia. This echoes the spirit of possibility and determination that emerged again from the UN's Transforming Education Summit in 2022. This year, through convenings in Paris, New York, and Brazil, we will take stock of progress and identify opportunities that will scale up coherent and effective support from international partners to African countries. This will be mostly through our positioning at the G20. Whether that's to tackle the foundational learning crisis and what it needs to fund it, or better equip teachers for a changing learning environment, to boost vocational programs for skills for just transitions, or leveraging the digital transformation we need to improve on how to learn, what we learn, and where we learn. At the heart of this, like so much else, is finance. Now is the time to rethink austerity-oriented international policies, reduce debt servicing costs, and ensure a more equitable global taxation system so that African countries can do what we know they want to do, to invest more efficiently, more equitably in capacities and the skills of their people. Excellencies, across this work, the UN Development System is your partner. Our offices, resident coordinators, UN country teams, regional capacities are all committed to helping you forge investment paths, shape policy and regulatory frameworks, garner the support that you need for multilateral and regional development banks and private investors. We count on member states to keep investing in the UN Development System, including the resident coordinator system, to ensure that we can do so. The inclusion of the African Union in the G20 and the addition of an extra seat for sub-Saharan Africa at the IMF are also major importance for the voice of Africa and for that of the Global South. Our voice will be essential in the lead-up to the Summit of the Future, at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development and the Second World Social Summit on Development in 2025. These are all critical milestones in our journey to reforming the global financial architecture so that it better supports developing countries in accessing finance they need and securitizing the critical breakthroughs that can further accelerate development progress across the continent. Let us harness these potentials for these fora, including this forum, which is an important stepping stone to the fora that we will have in the region of the African Union Commission. It is important to deliver the vision for Africa that is enshrined in the Agenda 2063 and the recent 10-year plan. Let's try to keep the promise of Africa, the Africa that it wanted, by Africans that want it. Thank you.